I will use this microphone. I'm not sure I need it. It's not a huge room, but I will use it all the same. I'm Alistair Ross. I'm the country editor at The Economist's The World Ahead, where we look at the world ahead, obviously, but generally we focus on the relatively short term. We're very interested in scenario planning, in forecasting. And I'm going to try and keep this, since it's not a packed room, and we're a very erudite and select group of people. I'm going to try and keep this relatively informal. So we will follow the programme, but I do want to encourage you, if you feel that there's something that you want more detail on at some point, I'll make sure that I open up to the floor at various points during the sessions. As I said, we're a pretty well-informed group of people as I look around the table. There's a lot of experience in the room. So you probably don't need much of an introduction as to what's going on in the world at the moment. You're probably fairly aware of the various challenges that we face, but I have written a few words, so I'll go through those and then we can get started. So, over the past few years, this so-called middle corridor from Central Asia across the Caspian, through the South Caucasus and on to Southeast Europe, has shifted from a niche route to a strategic artery of Eurasian connectivity. Russia's war in Ukraine, sanctions and wider decoupling pressures have forced governments and businesses to rethink long-standing trade and energy routes. Now, war in Iran has choked off trade routes to the south, and the Trans-Caspian corridor has quickly moved up the agenda in Brussels, in regional capitals, and in boardrooms. Freight volumes along this route have risen sharply since 2022, albeit from a low base, and are now measured in several million tonnes a year, with ambitions to multiply that again by 2030. But capacity, interoperability and regulation are still catching up. This is precisely where strategic partnerships and transformative investments come in. Not just more infrastructure, but smarter, better connected infrastructure that can change the economic geography of the region as a whole. Energy is the most immediate driver. The EU's decision to phase out Russian gas and Iran's action in the Strait of Hormuz have elevated the middle gas corridor and the broader Caspian system. Azerbaijan has pledged to roughly double gas exports to the EU to around 20 BCM a year by 2027. At the same time, projects like the planned Black Sea submarine power cable and green energy corridor from Azerbaijan and Georgia to Romania and Hungary signal a longer-term move towards integrating Caspian renewables and even hydrogen into Europe's energy mix. Energy security and regional stability are no longer separate priorities. They're foundations for shared prosperity. But this corridor is about more than hydrocarbons. It's about logistics, ports, railways, digital backbones and industrial zones, about customs cooperation and standards, and about whether Central Asia and the South Caucasus are treated as mere transit spaces or as long-term economic and technological partners. Of course, in a world in crisis, it has become a truism that every crisis brings opportunity. So today we'll be dissecting the crisis, but also identifying the opportunities for Azerbaijan, for the Caucasus and the wider region. So we're joined to do that by a very erudite and experienced group of people. First of all, we're going to have 2 or 3 speeches about the latest regional conflict and the impact it's having on this region and wider afield. And to kick us off with that, I'm delighted to welcome Amre Moussa, who is the Secretary General of the Arab League, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt. Amre, please give us your thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that a session like this one convenes to consider the effects reach that level, that would indeed affect the future of the region and the wider region around us. Now, the situation perhaps gives us some messages about the duration of the confrontation. And we see, and many other states and of the European regions, etc., see that we are in for a long period of confrontation, active wars, underground wars, called terrorism. So we have to get ready for a worst period that's coming up. The first observation is that America has moved from the power to reckon with from all sides, the Arab side, of course, Israel, to the point that President Sadat used to say that 99% of the hearts are anti-American hands. Here comes a question mark. After siding with Israel, and in fact, going on to implement whatever Israel is saying, vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis Palestine, vis-a-vis the Arab world, etc., is something new and very dangerous. We have the superpower leading a policy that is not, that we haven't seen. We know that how the US is defending Israel, and we accept some aspects of it. But to the extent that they go to war, and a very dangerous one, according to the Israeli point of view, the Israeli plan, the Israeli aspirations, as mentioned and affirmed and reaffirmed by the Prime Minister of Israel, raises a question mark. Are we watching the US, the superpower of the era, changing its policy of having cards vis-a-vis everybody and trying to reach a kind of consensus here and there into an open, steady ally with Israel against the Arab world and the rest of the region? This is a very serious thing. What to do vis-a-vis the superpower concentrating on implementing the Israeli plans in the Middle East, supporting them, and try to reach a state of affairs in the region where Israel will be the, perhaps with some exaggeration, the superpower of the region. And I don't think this will succeed, but this is the goal of the extreme right in Israel. So, in short, I see a very serious, dangerous period of time coming up. Now that the war is going on against Iran, and after that, nobody supposes that Iran will defeat the United States. But also, if things go that way and that America will destroy Iran's forces, developing forwards. Can we retrieve the situation? Can we stop it? And we can, not we can, but we should do whatever we can. What are the forces that can help us? That's the question. Where is China? Where is Russia? Many believe that, yes, they are there, getting ready. And they will not just sit tight and leave things to develop into whatever direction in the Middle East, affecting oil, affecting gas, affecting the trade in general. So we have to, all of us, all regions and the international community, the UN, etc. We have to get ready for a very bad, dangerous, serious period in regional and international. So I stop here and
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. I didn't ask you to be cheerful, and there's no reason why I should be. So let me just put a very quick question before we move on to the next speaker. Let's dismiss for the moment the justifications that have been given by the United States and Israel for this action. In some ways, it doesn't really matter. This is where we are. But what I'd like to get a sense of from you is what you think should have happened. What would have been a more effective course to take? I think we can probably agree that we weren't in a stable situation, that we hadn't reached a point of stability, of equilibrium in the Middle East where we could just allow things to carry on as they were. So what actions would you have recommended to the American, the Israeli governments had you been asked?
thank you. I would say that when America was thinking, like, what to do, the goal was how to regain Iran, to be on the side of America, and change its policy, the regional policy, according to certain understandings. That is exactly what Israel tried immediately to affect. And that was the reason why the successive visits of Mr. Netanyahu is prepared. This should not happen. Iran has to be destroyed, not one on America's side. Here comes the issue of question mark. Israel really changed, affected, and changed the American policy from a posture to how to win Iran on America's side to the destruction of Iran as the extreme right government in Israel wanted to happen, which is happening now. Will they succeed? I really don't know. I cannot say no, but I can say this.
Okay, well, whether they can succeed or not and where we're headed, I am going to come back to that. And I want to get everybody's views. But for the moment, let's move on to our next speaker, who is Yves Le Terme, former Prime Minister of Belgium. Yves, your thoughts, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Let me start by putting forward a disclaimer. I'm very, very far from the level of expertise of my predecessor, Amr Moussa, in Belgium, and I'm watching what's happening in the Middle East, of course, in some decades. But what I will say is maybe 6-7 remarks that you have to take with that disclaimer in mind. So it will not be the sophistication of based on the experience and the insights and the proximity also of what's happening in the region. Number one, I think that we as Westerners, we have been on a learning curve for the last 2 years. The learning curve in terms of coping with the new US leadership. And this is another example in this sequence where the summit of The Hague, related to NATO, tariffs, Liberation Day, and now the unilateral, well, bilateral with Israel, but the way the decision was taken to have the attacks on 2 weeks ago, apparently without too much, not only consultation, but even information flows among the group of so-called Western allies, is again a lesson that we stand alone, as for instance, as the European Union. Second element, it seems to me that the cost of defense is higher than the cost of aggression. There is of course, it's not the first time that we witness a so-called asymmetric war, but the massive use of these drones, and until now the response with very expensive missile systems and defense systems, this is not sustainable. And I think this is a question of days, not in the long run, but the battlefield in Ukraine, now in the Middle East, we see that there has been a kind of democratization of the aggression. It's cheaper, it has become cheaper to attack another country, and we can have now a mix of warfare, form warfare and guerrilla. They are closer to one. There's a kind of convergence, and I think the response to that new kind of warfare is very, very expensive, and I blame the military leadership of Western nations that we are ill prepared facing this reality, because we are talking about drones since 8 to 10 years. I remember visits to China and other places where they were developing drones, and one would think that at a certain moment that stuff would be used also for the worse, and so we are not prepared for that. Third remark, in terms of Iran, we are now constantly talking about the present Mullahs and the past, the Pahlavi regime, and for me it's not clear to what extent there's a capacity to unleash the internal, to unleash is maybe not the right verb, but to structure the willingness of a massive majority of the Iranians to have another way in the future. So you cannot impose a regime change from the outside in a country with, 90 million people, with such a tradition, with such a... And I think we talk about millions when we talk about people loyal to the current leadership. So this is a very complex element, and as I see it until now, you have the Pahlavi, who apparently has been gaining traction in terms of an alternative to the Mullahs, but that's the regime of the past. And he plays the guards by Savak, and you have almost the same situation and the same resentment also amongst larger parts of the Iranian population. But the question mark is, how can we support, help, fuel the coming into place of a credible, legitimate alternative to the Mullahs? I think it's easy and very comfortable for me and for others to talk about that, sitting in a nice hotel in Baku on the ground, with the violence and the terror of the current leadership is more difficult, but still I think this is, if we ever want Iranian proxies to be, let's say, belonging to the past, to the global past, this is the number one question. What can be integral as an alternative to the current leadership? There are the Mujahideen of the Iranian people, the people in exile. So I think that we should pay more attention to that. For the element, I think we're very lucky that China has this very adult and prudent behavior it has displayed over the last, not only the last weeks, since long. Because I can imagine that the European Union is not the only economy in the world that is suffering from the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, and until now, what I know is that the Chinese leadership is handling this crisis in a very prudent way, not adding elements to the conflict. Fifth element, our religion of the global value chains was already under pressure because of the American protectionism, but even before, let's say, the imbalance in competitiveness and imbalance in trades, specifically goods, trade of goods with China. So there was already a lot of debate and discussion about global value chains, but it's clear now that with this kind of conflict, the need to strengthen the self-reliance and the capacity to sustain an economic development, even being cut off from global sourcing of minerals and energy and goods, that we have to review this. I was the Secretary General of the OECD when, in the second decade of this century, we were advocating for massively and globally, all over the place, for putting in place the most efficient global value chain. So we will have to think it over. So, and of course, there's the central issue of the energy, of the autonomy, the strategic autonomy, and this region, of course, plays a crucial role for the European Union, where we have to have a mea culpa. We lost 15 years of time. I mean, if I look into the eyes of my colleagues of the Western Balkans, I feel ashamed. When I was in the rotating presidency of the European Union, we went to the Western Balkans to pledge that they would, in the next decades, become a member state of the European Union. But there was the issue of Turkey, there was the enlargement fatigue, and there were all kinds of also factual, real issues with some elements of the negotiations and security issues and so on. But nevertheless, I think that if Europe wants to be a credible actor in this region, we should resume the enlargement. We should have a clear message for the Western Balkan countries, and not only a message, but also act along our words, and including also to Moldova. And we should have a next package of enlarging the next package. I mean, the next group of countries just joining the European Union. I think this would be more valuable than to travel to Kiev and to say you will belong to Europe without any backing and without any stable ground. And then last point, I'm not a specialist in terms of energy and provision of energy and corridors, and there are lots of corridors, and you have to study a bit before you understand which corridor is belonging to what country and so on. But it's clear that we need there a massive investment to go away from fossil fuels, and that there is a massive effort to be done, which is, I think, in terms of profitability, a no-brainer, which is an excellent business case. So the more you invest in renewables and connection to this region here in terms of fossil fuels, the better it will fare. So, and there's no alternative, more or less. But once again, I come back to the disclaimer. These are 7-8 thoughts without being hindered too much by the knowledge and experience of, for instance, my friend Amber Rousseau. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. A lot of interesting thoughts there. I would like to come back to you on. I mean, there's a bunch of things I'd like to come back to you on, but I'll stick to one for the moment. You have mentioned that whenever I hear this word "should," my heart slightly sinks, because it's very easy in these kinds of events to give a wish list, to say this is what we should do, this is what I'd like to see. What I'd like to hear, though, is what we can do, what the realistic probabilities are, and what the blockers are to further enlargement of the EU, and whether there's really any prospect in the short to medium term that is going to happen. And the other thing that I'd like to tie into that is, as far as I'm aware, Azerbaijan has not expressed any particular interest in being part of the EU. And you can understand that position, given the geographical location, given the history of Azerbaijan's role in the region. Why should it look at Europe as the definitive way to go? So I'd just like to get your thoughts on the practicalities of further EU enlargement.
But to start with the second, if there was any doubt about this, of course we are not talking about Azerbaijan in terms of enlargement. They are not a candidate, they're not interested, and that's fair enough. I think that's also very understandable. given the geographical situation. But I think in terms of Azerbaijan, the EU has to deserve the special attention of Azerbaijan. This is a beacon of stability in a region under stress, and Ilham Aliyev has lots of options to continue to develop his economy like he's doing now, and to develop his nation, and he has a track record of the last 15, 20 years which is quite impressive. He has lots of options, and we should be conscious of the fact that we have to deserve his, we have to do our utmost best to not to sit on our knees, but to deserve his attention, and to respect Azerbaijan as a partner to discuss with. To give an example, this means that we should be aware when we vote resolutions mingling into the domestic affairs of a country like Azerbaijan. We should know that this is closing doors for future talks when we need them, so to say. So, looking into the eyes of Azeris, I feel ashamed as a citizen of the European Union that we have been over the last years, on the one hand, teaching Azerbaijan how to behave in domestic, including in domestic aspects here, and on the other hand, the day after, coming to say, can you sell us more gas? This is the typical European attitude that in a world where it is more about interest than about values, that doesn't work. In terms of enlargements, when I hear when I listen to the current generation of leaders in Europe, I think time is running, but it's running in the right direction. I think the ownership or the acceptance of the fact that we should indeed be on an enlargement dynamic, I think is growing very rapidly. I think the Turkey issue is now completely to the side. We're talking about the Western Balkans, we're talking about Moldova, we're talking about Iceland very recently. And I think that also in terms of numbers and absorption capacity for the European economy, this is feasible. All these countries have gone through a very tough process. Well, there's one country that even changed its name. It's Coat of Arms and so on to deserve membership. So I think from both sides there's a new window of opportunity building up. There will be changes of leadership in key countries. I hope that, for instance, in France, it won't go in the wrong direction in terms of this issue also. But I'm also pessimistic in terms of the possibility to have a very vast majority or unanimity in the Council of European Union soon.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to hear some optimism. Let's move along to the third and final speaker for this first session. Rafael Pescata Maceredo is the former ambassador of Spain to Ethiopia, Germany, and to the People's Republic of China. So quite a broad footprint. Rafael.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Let me address the issue of the Middle East, although doing this in front of both sides a little bit bold, maybe. I think in the last few years, the United States and Israel have made a number of steps which were aiming at drawing a new map of the Middle East. The Abraham Peace Agreements of 2020 signaled that some Arab countries were willing to make peace with Israel without taking into account the situation in Palestine. The Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th unchained an Israeli response which destroyed a good part of Gaza and ended in the death of more than 70,000 people. The fall of Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria had two direct consequences. One of them, the weakening of Hezbollah through also Israelis' interventions in Lebanon, and the decision of Israel to occupy parts of the territory of Syria beyond the Golan Heights, which they occupied since 1967. Then the American attacks against Iran last June, which destroyed part of its nuclear capacity and also eliminated part of its leadership. And finally, recent Israel's concrete steps which seem to aim at facilitating a possible annexation of the West Bank. At the center of this new vision is Israel as the new hegemon in the Middle East, with overwhelming military superiority, the only nuclear power in the region, and with the full backing of the US, without which it would have been impossible for Israel to do all this. This was the political framework in which Israel and the US launched their last attack against Iran. Again, with overwhelming air and naval superiority, but with maybe a lack of clarity about the political goals of this attack. A number of goals were mentioned: eliminating the nuclear program, eliminating the missile capacity, stopping Iran's maneuvers with its proxies in the region, even regime change, and it was even suggested that maybe this was not at all yet Trump's idea that Netanyahu's capacity to convince Trump to do this attack. Meanwhile, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, creating a crisis in global energy markets and multiplying pressures on Trump to finish the intervention. If in the end the regime falls, it will be, of course, a major confirmation of this new map of the Middle East that Israel and the US are trying to draw. If the regime survives, on the other hand, it would be a major setback for this new map of the Middle East. And in that scenario, we will have to see what does the Iranian regime do about its nuclear program, considering, for example, what happens with North Korea, which succeeded in getting nuclear weapons and nobody attacks North Korea. And also other countries in the region like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, who will see what they do if Iran in the end tries to get nuclear weapons. In a more general sense, I think that these Israeli actions with American support have generated a profound malaise in the region, which hasn't found its expression yet, in part because of the serious Russian weakening of its presence in the Middle East because of the war in Ukraine, and because China's reluctance to get involved in Middle East tensions. In the end, everything depends on how the war ends. Trump will probably keep it going until oil markets and polls in the US persuade him to stop. And meanwhile, public support in the US for Israel is diminishing. And Iran will do its utmost to resist, inspired by its ethic of martyrdom. The question then is, how will the war end, with or without regime change? And how will this malaise about the new role of Israel as regional hegemon in the Middle East manifest itself? Meanwhile, I'm sorry to say that Iran's role in this crisis is non-existent as a consequence of our internal division. And this internal division is a consequence of our lack of political independence, because if we are militarily dependent on the US, we will also be, or we are also politically independent. I think Europe is doing interesting things in Ukraine, which might in the end strengthen our defense capability and maybe reduce our dependence on the US. But for the time being, that's still a long way ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, excellent. Well, I'm briefly going to open up to the floor. What I prefer is questions. If you have a statement that you'd like to make, that's fine, but do please keep it very short because we're limited with time. I'm going to come to you first and then you. Please.
Thank you. I'm really concerned that we are focused very narrowly on the last war more than anything else. I think that the bigger plan that is being unfolding in front of us really started around 2002 when, in fact, in Beirut, the Arab states offered a final and definitive solution to the Palestinian problem with return to boundaries, two-state solution, and full recognition and normalization by all 22 states. I stand corrected. It said missing, but that was, I think, the most important thing. What is stunning, and you may consider it a coincidence, but even allies such as existed before when Iraq fought the Iran war, were supported by the West, suddenly became the enemies of the West, and pumped up charges of weapons of mass destruction and so on, led to the destruction of Iraq. Now, what is stunning to me is that if you look at the map of the Middle East then and the Middle East now, in those last quarter century, practically every country in the region around Israel has been destroyed and divided. I'll give you examples. Well, Iraq has been divided. Iraq has been divided. Syria has been divided. Lebanon is now more or less divided in two. Yemen has been divided. Sudan has been divided twice. Somalia has been divided. Libya has been divided into two. And as a result, you have these growing tensions. And I suspect that these growing tensions are intentional and that they're going to continue for a while. The other states, small states, have become client states of the United States. I'm talking about the Gulf states. All of them, from Kuwait on downwards, have American bases and depend on American bases. And as a result, this last big piece, which was Iran, is now being tackled in this way. I think that policy is not going to lead to a new stability. It will, in fact, lead to further instability. And yes, dominated by a hegemon, but at the same time, by two hegemons if you want, but at the same time, that risks a continued instability and, as Andre said at the beginning, a potential underground reaction elsewhere. So my question is, if the Western powers, primarily the Europeans, their primary interest in seeing stability in the region, why are they totally absent from a manifestation of a role in what has been going on?
It's a good question. I suspect it's one for Yves. Yves, could I ask you to field that question? Where are the Europeans? I know where the British are. We're floating around in the English Channel trying to get our boats working. So.
I think that my neighbor, the Spanish ambassador, has already pointed at the fundamental problem, which is that in terms of foreign policy, we don't have the power of being united sufficiently. So we have initiatives, we have thoughts, we have statements, but we don't have unanimous voicing of proposals, and we're not backed by military power. And this is all by all military. This is warfare. And we try to fill a gap in the field of humanitarian issues and try to protect military bases and fellow citizens that live in the region, and be a constructive partner proposing ideas and solutions. But yeah, I think we don't have a real foreign policy that is supported, backed by military power. And you need it when you want to engage in conversation in this kind of playground.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have time for one more intervention.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
In politics, the rule is if your name or the country's name announced, you have the right to say a few words. As Ida mentioned Turkey's name, so I'm the former EU Minister and Chief Negotiator of Turkey. And Turkey has been in a long collaboration with the European Union. It's the 63rd anniversary of signing the Association Agreement, 30th anniversary of joining the Customs Union, 21st anniversary of starting the negotiations. It shows how patient, how stubborn, and how tolerant Turkey is to become a member. But one friend, when I was in the EU business, told us that if the political climate is okay, you can become a member in a few months. If the political climate is not okay, then they will say your tomatoes are not red enough or your cucumbers are not green enough, and you will wait for many more years. So the problem here is giving wrong hopes to countries. Turkey is, we are used to it, but giving
host the Western Balkans or Ukraine. You've mentioned absorption capacity, that Iceland or small countries is absorbable, but Ukraine is not absorbable. But hopes are being given to Ukraine that they will become a member, and this is wrong. It should be fair. The rules must be clearly put, and it should be continued. Just one experience from Iran. Turkey has a frontier with Iran, which was drawn in 1639. It's the same border. We managed to keep our relations to put in a positive way, if I may say so. But I was first secretary at the Turkish embassy when the Iraqi-Iranian war started. I remember clearly that 23rd of September 1980, and the Iraqis said it was a Friday. On Tuesday we will be in Tehran. It took 8 years, 1 million people died, no centimeter square of territory was exchanged, but it was a missiles war. So when the United States is planning to fight with Iran, they should have looked back to history that Iran has a capacity and power to go into a missile war. And many questions are being asked, how long this will be happening. I think Iran can continue for years. The problem here is whether the United States will continue or not. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. You raise very interesting points, and you do so very diplomatically, so I'm very grateful for that. God, I'd love to carry this on. There's so much to talk about, so many points being raised that somebody should be addressing a bit more fully than we are this morning, but we do have to move on. I have to close this session. I'm sure our speakers need no thanks, but all the same I would like to thank them, and perhaps a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much. Okay, as our panelists take their seats, very happy to move on. I don't know how far we're going to move. I mean, formally, according to the agenda, this is a more sort of business-focused, opportunities-focused, locally focused session. But I'm really happy to take it wherever you guys want to take it, because I think there's so much that's urgent to discuss. There's interest in the room for all kinds of topics, I'm sure. But I am going to, and I am going to invite you all in to put your questions and observations as we go through. But I'm going to kick things off by sticking to that original agenda. And in that light, what I'd like to hear from each of you, I think, is your sense of how well this region is set up to meet the rising challenge. So suddenly, there is a great deal of urgency and interest in the Trans-Caucasus in particular, and Eastern Europe to provide some relief for the supply in both directions of goods and energy. So there are tremendous bottlenecks, obviously, there are always going to be, but they must be really showing themselves now. So let's start with Edwards. Can you give us a sense, please, of your view of where the key bottlenecks are and what the prospects are for overcoming?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Just first a remark from previous session here. It's not that we wake up yesterday and decided that we need the Trans-Caspian corridor because of the ongoing hostilities either to the north or to the south from this region. No, I mean, this was in making already, I would say, for several decades. It's just that the real life proved us to be right, that we needed to be developed. It wasn't developing as fast as we would like for various reasons, objectively. I mean, frankly speaking, whilst you have viable alternatives and cheaper alternatives, it's very difficult to focus your investments in. And we are speaking about attracting a need to attract mostly private investments or investments of international or European credit institutions, which are also, I mean, one of their demands is that projects must be economically viable. So there were some conditions which were not entirely conducive for the development of the corridor. Actually, as I said, I mean, it has to compete. It has to compete with the Northern Corridor construction, which is now starting even not from the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 22, but even starting from the illegal and illegitimate occupation and annexation of Crimea. We're speaking about 2014, when that corridor was severely politically and security compromised. Then we speak about the southern corridor. Actually, there are sort of the two branches of it. One would go through Iran, and up to probably last month, Bandar Abbas was the largest port actually handling goods coming and going to Central Asia. Now it's severely compromised. There were some plans which started under the previous administration in Afghanistan in building trans-Afghan connections from Central Asia, again down to the Indian Ocean, railway lines, roads. Currently, with the ongoing warfare between Afghanistan and Pakistan, I would say this is again something which is on hold. Not to speak that the wider international community is not ready to engage with de facto authorities in Kabul. And of course, I mean, if you need to attract some private investments, again, by the most possible private investors and credit institutions, it would be considered extremely, I must say, risky to go into Afghanistan currently. What remains, yes, the access to the east, through China. From geographical point of view, it makes very, very little sense to travel several thousand kilometers to the east to the closest Chinese port on the Pacific in order to reach Western Europe, for example, as one of the markets. So I would say this is one. Another thing is that also until probably 2017, and here Marcus would be probably corroborating what I'm saying, the climate within Central Asia was not conducive. I would say most of those countries were barely at the speaking terms with each other. And it's only thanks to some reform processes and change of guard in some of those countries that actually they are now engaged in full-scale cooperation among themselves, and not only among themselves, but now we see that this sort of the drive towards cooperation is extending beyond purely Central Asia, now with Azerbaijan becoming an integral part of this internal discussion on coordination when the President Aliyev officially joined the regular meeting, the meeting of the leaders. So, and probably now it's going to sit down into also some closer cooperation and coordination on the working level between the countries. Which means that when we speak about development of Trans-Caspian corridor as important part of the middle corridor, which is joining Europe, Central Asia and beyond into China, where we have common interests, where eventually it might be a problem with Afghanistan would be solved, and then they would have access to Southern Asia across the Eurasian landmass. So it's becoming much more easier to operate, because what we need, amongst many other things, yes, infrastructure for sure. We need to invest in brick and mortar, or in this case, probably in steel rails. But it's also about creating corridor in terms of sort of free flow with minimum bureaucracy on each and every border, with electronic documentation actually going along with cargoes, and for that you need close coordination between the governments.
Right.
So now, I mean, this is the right moment. And this is why also the European Union on its side is doing whatever it for the moment can to support this process, starting from financing, where you need money. We're speaking about 10 billion of euros dedicated to Trans-Caspian corridor, to this connectivity actually from the European shores of the Black Sea up to the eastern borders of Central Asia, including 3 billion specifically dedicated to Central Asia itself. So, also from the organizational point of view, last October, for the first time, the High Representative Vice President Hayat Kallas convened a meeting in Luxembourg specifically on security and connectivity in both the, I would say, the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea regions, with participation 27 EU member states, with participating at ministerial level, Ukraine, Moldova, Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and all 5 Central Asian countries. So it's going to repeat itself, this sort of the coordination meeting later this year. We are working very closely, I mean, with our financial arms, with the European Investment Bank and EBRD. I know artists now. For quite a time we worked very closely together in Tashkent. So this is something, but I must also say that it's very much up to private businesses to decide to pick up on this. And of course, they are reading political statements, they are looking at nice and beautiful blueprints for this or that, but they must believe in this project. And what we see that the gradually this trust, this belief that the corridor is going to work is growing by the day. And many very important global logistics operators are showing their keen interest to join the project.
Super, thank you very much for that. Alkis from the EBRD, what would you add to that, or indeed take away?
Actually, I wouldn't take away anything. I would like to repeat what he said. He said everything I wanted to say. So, but I was.
Okay, we can move on.
I was saying, you can see. No, I just wanted to. At first, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present the views, sort of both the institutional views and actions that would adopt what the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development brings into the discussion of and the wider connectivity agenda and the Trans-Caspian corridor. So we look at connectivity as a key priority, and this is act of necessity as well as, you know, a response to the challenges that the geopolitical situation brings in the region right now, and has been breaking in the region for some time already. So, under the word connectivity, we're talking about, of course, transport infrastructure, and that we come back to this because you mentioned what have been the obstacles, and of course, when you know, from a very practical perspective, a truck driver, you know, has to go through border to border to border, then wait for some time at the Caspian Sea to come from whatever port, to Kandahar or Tau to Baku, and then cross Caucasus, go to Podio, and then it's just a big process. And It takes a long time and it's costly. That's why the northern corridor was an obvious alternative and commercially viable. It was too easy to cross the border from Kazakhstan to Russia, from Russia to then Ukraine and then to the rest of the European continent. So that was the reason why it was the dominant way, as well as whatever the shipping industry is doing in maritime shipping was able to contribute. Now we have this Trans-Caspian corridor. I think geographically the shortest way to connect Europe and Asia, and it's up to the cooperation of the governments and also the involvement of the private sector, as we very accurately mentioned, Edwards, that to make this happen. And I agree with you, it's the interest and the possibility of making the middle corridor is increasing and it's working. We see it in cooperation starting from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, being quite often meeting, achieving cooperation agreements, writing documents and subscribing to multimodal ways of transferring goods. Then we're looking at the green corridor. There is so much renewable energy that could be generated in Central Asia and in Azerbaijan that could be transferred then through the Black Sea cable. That is a project that will be connecting Georgia to Europe. And it makes sense geopolitically, as well as the energy that is required in Europe can take this energy in. So it is needed, and it's a matter of international cooperation. So platforms like this and many more are needed for the decision makers to think of simplifying procedures and achieving also the trust. We didn't mention the word trust, but it's essential for countries that were not naturally trusting each other until a few years ago. You mentioned about Central Asia. Yes, it took leadership changes in Central Asia for countries that have so much in common to start talking to each other and becoming a group. And here, in our very focused, that's where we are right now. We have Azerbaijan and Armenia, thank God, to bring new perspectives, the world is there are not only the crisis that we are facing and we are so much troubled with, but also some signs of hope that the international community is reacting and is finding ways. So we hope that this will happen. As an institution, we are ready to support it. I mean, we want to put our funds where our mouth is, and I can give examples maybe as a result.
As the opportunity arises, that way, it would be good to get on some specifics, but just for the moment, I mean, first thing I reflect is that interesting that in this era of supposed deglobalization, we're actually talking about a region where globalization is the benefits of it, the urgency of it is being emphasised and being perceived much more widely. So that's speaking from the point of view of the economist, a jolly good free trade liberal publication, I can say that we celebrate that wholeheartedly. What I did want to put to you, it's maybe a bit unfair, but I didn't want to get back onto predicting wars. But one of the things that I feel in this discussion is this sense of impetus and urgency that's being injected into the integration process in this region by Ukraine war, by Strait of Hormuz and the Southern Corridor blockages. What happens if both of those corridors come back online? We talk about long terms here. I mean, you build a new port, you build new ships to transship goods, etc. These are big investments. They take a long time to come to fruition. So, is the confidence there that the interest in the middle corridor is going to remain as intense as it is if those other corridors come back online?
It's not an easy question to answer, but I would draw a parallel, like a vein and an artery system. There is capacity for trade and energy and emerging needs that instinctively justifies the existence and of the Trans-Caspian route and the middle corridor, in addition to what may come back in the market as a possibility. There is population boom in Central Asia. Societies there are very young. They are producing more. They need more. And it's not only for Europe to take the benefit from trade, but also it's not also for the European Union countries to buy stuff like energy, but also to sell goods to growing populations. So there is a trend, and the trade volumes are increasing. So it will eventually justify, and then for the people who are in the market to have the options available made to them, it's also much better than having dependence on one route or one possibility. They have an ecosystem to choose from, and that actually is a secret to resilience. Because yes, maybe this crisis is not being resolved, and I hope soon, then something else may come up. So you need to have the alternative options all over.
Great. Jolly good. Well, I actually want to move on to another question, Atta. And since you're the only person who hasn't spoken, I'm going to put this question to you. It may not be the question you want, or whatever, but I do think it's an important and an interesting one, and that is something really interesting has been happening. I mean, Donald Trump has thrown this hand grenade into the global system, and we're all adjusting to the shrapnel and the uncertainty of what's coming out of that. But it strikes me that one of the things that every country almost in the world is being forced to do is to recalibrate its commitment to what is assumed to be its value system. In a way, you can look from Turkey or from Egypt or from Hungary or from France eastwards towards China and think, why have I been fighting so hard to resist this partnership with the fastest, largest growing population market in the world, when suddenly, the other side of the planet has become entirely transactional and almost amoral. So, do you see a shift towards a focus on transactional judgment in the creation of political relations between nations from Western Europe all the way through to China? And of course the transport business is right in the middle of that, and the Central Corridor, among many other things, can be a funnel for Chinese goods coming into Europe all the way, and for European goods to travel back the other way. So is there a shift in the tone of the way governments are thinking about how they should transact with China?
I think Turkey is in a very important position, especially given the light of what's going on at this very moment. Of course, we are all aware of the huge investments regarding the middle corridor, and that of course includes the Zangezur corridor project. So yes, Turkey also is acting on a very transactional aspect to deal with the issues in the neighboring countries. And And it's a very difficult position Turkey is in at this very moment, because the war is right next to us, and Turkey has always, as you said, or in the previous, I think, panel, it has been discussed that, I think it was Volkan Bey, who said Iran's borders have not changed since 15th century, 16th, yes, century, even for a centimeter. So we are very careful, Turkey is very careful vis-a-vis its relationship with Iran, and it's very aggressive and ambitious towards having further investments with Azerbaijan, because even though we're talking about the northern corridor and southern corridor, and I hope there will be options, but at this very moment, Turkey is the only option. I mean, the middle corridor, because we have this Baku to Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, as you know, and also what we are, as an investment banker, I have to talk about some investments.
Yeah.
Some Azerbaijan investments in Turkey and Turkish investments in Azerbaijan as well, because even though we are talking about a larger region today than Azerbaijan, but since we are in Azerbaijan at this very moment, let me talk about a bit, let me focus more on Turkey, Azerbaijan economic relationship, apart from the political issues. Turkey, Azerbaijan so far, as of the year end, has invested $21 billion in Turkey. They have bought Petkim, petrochemicals company, used to be owned by the state. They have created this very big refinery, Star Refinery, and they recently, I believe in August 25, Azerbaijan announced a further $7 billion investment in Turkey, which is also not one-sided, because Turkish contractors are having a lot of investments in Azerbaijan, and that amount, as far as I know, has reached $18 billion. Most of, if not all, the contracts and works regarding or around the Zangezur project is done by Turkish corporates. But it's not just about the tunnels. They recently finished, about a year ago, Baku and Kars railway has been completed, 105 kilometers. Anyway, all I'm saying is that Turkey playing the game, trying to play the game very carefully, and getting the maximum out of what it already has, which is becoming even more important right now, because it's the only option, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future. And I do hope that there will be alternatives, like the Black Sea one especially, for the benefit of all the neighbors, not just for Turkey and Azerbaijan, of course. But there is still a lot to do in terms of investments, in terms of infrastructure, because Europe very much depends on this region for its energy, and only one option is not enough. And the political, let's say, brotherhood between Turkey and Azerbaijan, yes, it's great, but this peace, very peaceful and very friendly communication between the two, has to expand, and it has to go beyond Azerbaijan. This Zangezur project has to benefit Armenia, because it has, without their control, without their say in this project, I'm sorry to say that we were talking to President Aliyev in our first day, said this peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been for forever, but it has to be, I have to believe that it is for forever, only if a country like Armenia will also get the benefits, maximum benefit, to open up to Europe as well. So in terms of what I said at the very beginning, I will be focusing on the investments from both sides, from within Europe, because it can't be one way either. Okay, the benefits for Caspian countries not only limited to Azerbaijan, of course, is not going to be, doesn't have to come only from energy, supplying energy to Europe, but Azerbaijan has started through SOFAs certain investments in Europe as well. Like, they bought a stake at Gatwick Airport in London. They have pretty significant investments in Italy, solar panels, real estate investments, etc. But the more we see the interaction between Southeastern Europe, but not limited to Southeastern Europe, EU basically, and this region, via Turkey, obviously some great investments, and the more optimistic I could become for the future of this relatively easy access to energy from this region, but also for peace, continued peace. Kazakhstan is another example. They have started investing in Turkey, but I don't think it's going to stop in Turkey. It's going to go beyond Turkey as well. They recently bought a bank. They are planning to buy a digital bank. They bought a marketplace in Turkey. So I would like to see the communication between Europe and Caspian region in general to go beyond only energy and infrastructure. Energy and infrastructure, given the light of what's going on, is immediate, urgent issue. But without the support of the governments, as Eduardo was saying, without the commitment of the governments, it is not an achievement that one can have right away. And it is a huge investment as well. But as an investment banker, our eyes and ears are with these potential investors, but mostly the governments, to make sure that the contribution of us and Mike will be hand in hand going with the politicians.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much for that response. We're very close to the end of our running time officially, so I'm hoping I can hold you all here for a little while longer. You can put off your desire for coffee for just a short time longer, since we started a little late. And I want to open up this panel to the floor. I want to give you an opportunity to put any questions you may have, or make any comments that you might want to make. Everybody's got their eyes on that coffee. That's the problem. So, please identify yourself and speak in a loud voice.
Thank you very much. My name is Nuful from Palestine. I'm here as part of the Young Leaders Program. I work at the intersection of civil society and water policy. And coming from Central Asia, we see on Western media, we don't see Central Asian narratives very much compared to other regions. And my question is, the only narrative we see in Kazakhstan, in Western media, is the fossil fuel, oil and gas industries, mostly about how it's about the communication. And what is your perspective? What is your perspective on that? How do you think it should be solved on government level? Do you think it should be solved in partnership with civil society, or like why is the case, and what's the potential solution?
Yeah, let's discuss that. I think it's from a journalistic point of view, it's a very, very good point. Central Asia, it's sort of, nobody really knew it was there. 20, 30 years ago. And of course, it always was and is increasingly an important part of the picture here. So, well, let me come to you first on this. Is the European understanding of appreciation of engagement with Central Asia changing? And should it?
Yes, I would say my main challenge for my job is it's not to communicate with partners in Central Asia. It's probably the easiest part. The most difficult part it's just to keep Central Asia on the agenda of our leaders in Brussels and in other European capitals. And this is, I mean, we have the colleagues from media here present, and they know it better than I do, that the only news that are selling is bad news. So, and I would say that Central Asia is a victim of its own success. Because you don't have, bad news coming out like on a daily basis, attracting attention and everything. No, I mean, yes, indeed. Attention to Kazakhstan was attractive when the Caspian, this Baku consortium, the war in the overseas was hit, and then, yes, then it made sort of the headlines. For the rest, it's really to keep its attention focused, because there are so many challenges and irritants coming from everywhere else. At the same time, I would say the sort of the positive message is little bit gaining foothold. Why? Because, again, and this is probably people who are professionally dealing with media and information, or some anthropologists or psychologists could describe it, that with time being we are getting, I would say, bored and annoyed by enormous amount of negative news being dumped on us. I mean, so we are trying to look and to seek for something positive. And this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to feed in some of that positive message. And as you mentioned, really corroborating that we must sell the example of Central Asia worldwide as something that you could turn around, as sort of the backwater, into something which is advancing, which is progressive, which could set good example in many, many areas, including, one issue which might be of particular interest to the wider region, and this is that those are countries which are, by their very existence and successful development, showing that Islam and modernity are fully compatible. Especially, bordering Afghanistan, they have enormous challenge to keep this running. So, I'm doing my best to promote that. I'm probably, I wouldn't say the best salesman, but the most committed salesman for Central Asian cause. But we need more of those people who first understand what this is an opportunity, are ready and willing to promote the case of Central Asia, not only in Europe, but I would say worldwide.
Thank you very much. We have a final intervention from, please identify yourself and your source.
Well, I heard China was mentioned as a repentant. And in this very uncertain world, most likely China will maintain the stability and dynamic economic growth. And so my question is that in this region, do you see China as an opportunity or as a threat? And how China can play a more favorable partnership with countries in this region?
Okay, well that's a question you can answer in a minute and a half. Let's start with that. I'd like a word from each of you, but a very brief word. You've got 30 seconds or 45 at the most.
Sorry, that was well, again, we see more and more Chinese investments and interest for Turkey and the region. It's very slow moving, but what's actually encouraging is the government of Turkey is really very ambitious in terms of extending its relationship with a superpower, China, that at the expense of having some strained relationship with the US. And I'm actually really pleased to see that Turkey is no longer when it comes certain times, still there are Turkey is still very much, they have to act with the US interest, but we are seeing the trend to move more closer towards power like China, even with Russia. As you know, Turkey is playing a pretty significant role by keeping the neutral role between Russia and Ukraine in the war. I think they play the role very significantly. But anyway, the Chinese interest in Turkey and Turkey's ambition to have closer ties is stronger than ever.
Thank you very much. Eduardo, even more briefly, please.
Yes, on connectivity with our and Chinese efforts are complementary. We are sort of the situational allies there. We are sharing common interests. Actually, on security, I think also we are situational allies. We are sharing the same interests. On investments, clearly we are competitors, as we are competitors with India, with the United States, with everybody else.
Excellent. That's a nice comprehensive answer.
From my perspective, China is a member of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and I can tell you that there are a lot of investments that the bank is doing in the region, benefiting from Turkish or Chinese goods. They are investing in renewable energy, for example. There are so many turbines that are produced in China coming to give solutions. So, you know, in politics, that's a personal remark. I'm looking carefully at how China is calm, and I think China for big calm in these turbulent times.
Okay, well, on that note of global harmony, I think it's an excellent point at which to draw this to a close. Please do hang around and have coffee and continue the discussion in the next room. Allow me to thank you all for staying with us this morning. It's been fantastic to be in your company. Before we close, let's get a round of applause for our panel. Thank you.